Hey, Nicole.
Hey, how are you?
I am great. Welcome to this week's episode of The Wire. For those of you who have not joined us before, each week, Nicole and I focus on different segments of the real estate transaction that I would say, Nicole, for sake of description, could be improved from a security standpoint to make transactions safer and more efficient for consumers and the industry as a whole. How did I do on that description? I just made that up.
I'd say you nailed it.
Nailed it. Good.
Perfect.
I wasn't even going for nailed it. I was just going for mildly acceptable.
Good enough.
So what are we going to talk about today?
Well, one of the questions I get a lot is about our authentication process. And so I thought it would be really interesting to talk about authentication in general. And really, authentication is just a way of verifying that you are who you say you are when you are logging into a site. Many of us experience this whenever we go into our online bank account or email. And so what we really want to do is just break down what is acceptable, what's not acceptable, what's safe, what's not safe. And I think we should break those down today.
So let's take a step back even further though, and let's kind of set up the context of what we're talking about. Give me an example of where authentication, where these scenarios would be applicable.
Okay, so when I log into my bank account, I'm going to put my username and password in. And every single time I log in, it also requires me to put in a one-time password, which is texted to my cell phone. And that just verifies that I am the right person because I have an object in my hand that belongs to me, and it's being sent directly to me, verifying that I am the right person.
And that's an example of what you would call a two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication.
Correct.
Yep. Got it. Keep going.
Okay, cool. So there's really different types of authentication. There's two-factor authentication, like you just said, which is simply two different steps. There is also multi-factor authentication, and that is a variety of steps. And those are based off of a knowledge-based authentication piece, which could be a password, it could be some type of personal information. And then another part is based off something you have, whether that's a key fob that plugs into your computer, or it's a code that you have, some type of unique code, one-time password, that is something that you have. And then the third piece is a piece of biometric information, whether it's a fingerprint scan or a retina scan. So multi-factor authentication includes two of those pieces.
Cool. So we're going to talk a little bit about knowledge-based authentication.
I think we should talk about knowledge-based and multi-factor, but I think we should talk about both and how they're effective and how they are weak.
Cool. Let's start.
Okay, let's start with knowledge-based authentication. So knowledge-based authentication is something that was used more widely, definitely in the 2000s, I would say. I remember whenever I would sign up for an account, it would say, hey, what's the name of your first pet? Which, I only had one, so that was easy. And then it would ask me what street I grew up on and my mother's maiden name. So this was back in a time before social media had really been on the rise, and it seemed a lot safer. No one could really access that information. The internet was not used as it is today.
Yeah, it was really I remember, from someone who went to high school and really had little to no internet, right, to coming up through college and then becoming graduating and all that. And then so, watching a transition where I would do all of my banking by going to the bank. Right. And the bank could authenticate me because I would be there in person and I would give them a photo ID, a driver's license or whatever. And that's the form of authentication that they use to know I was who I said I was. But now, these types of authentications really came up through the internet and through banking, especially, but all kinds of secured portals, but could be from retirement accounts to stock accounts to whatever, but typically financial accounts. And so the banks could do things like they could say, They could ask you a series of questions that you gave them answers to when you set up those accounts. That would generally only be known by you because you weren't going on Facebook, or maybe maybe you were going on MySpace for a minute, but you weren't, none of that stuff really existed. So it made sense at the time back in 2004, right?
Right. And at that time, even then, I mean, I remember answering these questions and thinking, oh, what's my favorite restaurant? Man, I hope this doesn't change by the time I have to answer the question. Mm-hmm. And so there's another weak level there with knowledge-based authentication. But there's we both know that there's different types of knowledge-based authentication. So that's the basic static knowledge-based authentication.
And so what begins to happen, right? So what begins to happen is social media begins to take off, and we've built now these infrastructures where knowledge-based authentication is being pulled into everything from banking to especially financial accounts, as I mentioned, stock accounts or money accounts or whatever. So we have this infrastructure that's being built up around knowledge-based authentication and authentication that, what's called dynamic knowledge-based authentication, which they would pull information from, say, a credit report, right? So like who holds your mortgage, or what type of car financing did you get 5 years ago or whatever. And so we now have this infrastructure being built up, and at the same time, running in parallel, we are now sharing more information than we ever have before on social media.
Right, exactly. So I was just thinking,
how could that be bad?
Right. What's your mother's maiden name? No one will know that unless they see that my mom commented on my post and she has her maiden name on her profile. That would be weird.
So where were you born? Where are you from?
Right. Or your date of birth is on there?
Nicole, I'm going to send you this this copy and paste thing on Facebook. Make sure you keep it public so everybody can see it. And then I'm going to ask you 50 questions. If you could just go ahead and tell me about your first cat, and tell me about the street you grew up on, and tell me about, if you could just put all those answers on there so I could see them, that would be great.
Yeah, I would love to just learn more about you so that I can maybe steal your money.
And now keep in mind, you have, so there's things that appear, it's like, things don't always appear on the surface as to what is actually going on. And not all of these things have nefarious intent, but there are certainly people out there that are scraping that information that's publicly available on Facebook. And now we just saw this week that they're selling it on the dark web. So I don't know, Nicole, if you saw this, but I was reading an article just yesterday where 1.5 billion Facebook accounts are now on the dark web, where information like email, phone numbers, personal information, all that stuff has, for the last, how many years, has been being scraped from Facebook websites. So information that you make publicly available is now being traded and sold on the dark web.
Wow, we could dig into this whole topic so much more, but we won't today. But that it is crazy. It is crazy, and there's so many different ways that they're getting our information through social engineering. I mean, they're creating these quizzes like, hey, put your grandmother's maiden name plus your street name, and that's your flapper name from the 20s or something like that. Oh, great. I want to know my flapper name. So I put that in there, and bam, they have the information they need to access my accounts.
Yeah. And so let's say that you don't use information like that. Maybe it's tied to your credit report. Well, that's cool. But until 4 years ago, when Equifax gets hacked and they give up 145 million users from Equifax, and Equifax, for those that don't know, is a credit service. And they're pulling the dynamic knowledge-based authentication from credit services. So, it's all just a big cluster F. And to me, it's clear that knowledge-based authentication has massive holes in it. And, it's obviously one of the reasons why we haven't included it in our software.
Right. We can't base our authentication off knowledge-based authentication at all. Social security numbers are not secure.
Well, you can't build technology based on the way things were done 15 years ago. You
Right.
have to build technology based on what's the safest thing today and what's going to be the safest thing in the near to long term. And as much as we can predict those things, knowing that if that sort of thing were safe, then the credit bureaus wouldn't be getting security breached and putting all that information and disseminating it all on the dark web.
Right. And to make it even scarier, I mean, you're talking about Equifax in 2017. Let's also talk about T-Mobile possibly losing all of their clients' social security numbers to a data breach this week, or was it last week? I mean, it just happened. So I mean, this isn't slowing down. Just because you think you're clear from 4 years ago doesn't mean you're clear today from what's happening. And there's probably going to be even more released coming soon. Who knows? I mean, I'm not trying to predict anything, but it seems pretty clear that there's a lot going on right now with data.
And, listen, we are not doom and gloom folks. We are optimists by nature. And I think ultimately, like any entrepreneur who's out there trying to solve problems is an optimist by nature, but we're also realists. And the unfortunate reality is these problems are getting worse and not better. And we're really just, if this makes folks uncomfortable by putting our thumb on some of these things that we shouldn't be doing, then so be it. I'd much rather have someone be uncomfortable and change a behavior than to keep doing what it is we're doing and makes us vulnerable and easy to compromise.
Right. All right. So that's knowledge-based authentication. Let's go back to multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication is what is recommended these days. And the reason why is because it takes three different types. Like I said, there's three different types of authentication that are part of it. Knowledge-based authentication is one part of it. And that can be simply just a password. Password is a knowledge-based authentication technique. The other one is something you have. So based off of something you physically have, and that can be your cell phone where you receive a one-time text. It can be a token, something physical that identifies who you are. And then the third one is a biometric. And like we said before, it can be your retina scan. It can be your facial recognition, a fingerprint. These things should not be scary. People are freaked out by this. This is something that is actually going to uniquely identify you and make sure that you are secure. It's not as scary. People are not selling your face scan to China. They don't care about that. They're trying to make sure they're protecting their business.
Well, and here's the other reality is that if we really cared about that stuff, we wouldn't be sharing the photos that we share on Facebook and tagging people in them. We wouldn't be sharing anything on social media at all if we were that concerned about facial recognition software and how it's going to be impacting things. Because the reality is if someone wants to get that stuff, it's all readily available. It's out there. That's, Facebook has built a business on facial recognition and they already know who we are based on a photo.
Right. Also, they're listening to us on our phones.
Well, and, TikTok is owned by the Chinese Communist government. So we have 1 billion users right now on TikTok. And, there's something to be said that it is potentially a way for them to have a back channel and backdoor into, into users of their platform. So
I believe it.
It's hairy.
The things we see and the things we find are a little bit terrifying, and we smile because we're uncomfortable because we know what it means. But it's also, this is what also drives us to make things safer and lock things down. And we're trying to educate everybody so they understand, we're not preaching this stuff to make ourselves feel better. We're trying to raise awareness for what's happening out there and how to properly protect your clients, yourself, your business, your family, in the industry.
Well, and ideally what we're trying to do, right, at the end of the day is we need to know in real time that this person who I am going to send money to is actually who they say they are, and they have access to this account of where these monies are supposed to go. And that's, ultimately the safest way we can do that, and how we utilize technology to do that. The things like facial recognition and video facial recognition, where in real time, you make somebody turn their head a certain direction and say a number that is on the screen, that's the kind of stuff that we're talking about. So how do you incorporate those types of things and then tie them to those accounts of where those funds need to go? So that, those are the solutions that are getting built and need to be built. And that's the way that we begin to solve some of this stuff, where we make that technology accessible to consumers in these transactions, so they can be certain they're not going to be compromised. And as businesses and business owners, we can be certain that the technology that we're using is able to actually prevent this stuff.
Yeah, and something has to change, because the industry's not changing. Again, let's talk about it. The industry's not changing the way they're doing their business. No one's paying these victims for their losses, which is, again, why we addressed the GoFundMes last week. We're letting these victims go to GoFundMes because they're left high and dry and no one's accepting responsibility, but no one's making changes. And so that's our big problem. It's like, let's make some changes. Let's do what's right for the industry, for the consumer, for ourselves. If you want longevity in this career, you're going to have to change something.
Especially now. The ground is shifting under our feet with the amount of an influx of monies that have come into the real estate industry in the last 10 years. And we're beginning now to see that start to play out. We're beginning to see how the billions and billions and dollars have gone into real estate and technology investments in the last 10 years are beginning to take shape, with companies like Open Door and, these different groups that ultimately, this stuff is moving fast. And as a result, we have to stay in pace with it.
Yeah. And the thing is that like this industry really struggles. And I think in the past year and a half, the industry has really had to make some major shifts to using technological resources. And it's been a struggle for many, and many have not done it, but they're also suffering because they are becoming victims of these types of situations. So there comes that time where you're like, hey, you got to move with it. It goes back to that book, Who Moved My Cheese? Well, you're going to have to move with it and find the cheese. If you don't know that book, get it on Amazon or wherever you get books. It's all about how you have to adjust with the times to make sure you stay on track. And maybe it even gets better. You have to protect your business.
That's right. You can't be afraid of change. That's one of the reasons we do this. We do this to not just shake the fear of all of this into people, but also to be a resource to be able to help folks through it. So, if you're listening to this, have your broker reach out, have your title partner reach out, have the folks that are in charge of your clients' monies reach out, whatever. We're here to be a resource. But at the end of the day, we're not going to sit quietly while this problem is getting worse and the folks being put in charge of keeping people safe aren't doing it. So, it is what it is.
That's right. So SafeWire, just to let you guys know, SafeWire does use multi-factor authentication. We do that because that is what the recommended way is right now. And as things shift, we will make sure we stay on top of things and keep our clients secure and these transactions secure.
Yeah, listen, knowledge-based authentication, even dynamic knowledge-based authentication is dead. It's dead. It's been dead. And, it's just, again, it's another one of these ticking time bombs that these guys who are infiltrating this stuff aren't dumb, and they have most of this information already. So if they compromise an account, something like that isn't going to prevent anything.
And the reason we're addressing this is because we were wondering, hey, is that a better way for us to do business? And then we Googled it. And in 2013, 8 years ago, it said it was a dead authentication method. So if we go back to that.
The Google said it.
Google said it, right.
But it's not, that wasn't our final determination of whether or not we were going to incorporate it into what we're building isn't what Google told us.
No.
It's a combination of of trends and how information is shared today, and how information and technology is evolving in real time and in the near term and in the future. These are the things that drive us to make better decisions when it comes to how we build technology. It's just because Google said it isn't a reason to not do it. Like, Google's pretty smart, but we probably need to vet it a little more than that.
Yeah, we got to evaluate our options.
Anything else we want to poke any holes into, Nicole?
No, I don't think so. Not today. What about you? Not
today. Can I just say that, so since we had the Facebook apocalypse yesterday, I'm spending a lot of time on Twitter, as I'm sure the rest of the world was. And, it's like one rabbit hole after another with this stuff, and finding, one more technologist after another. And it's just, it's just weird times, man.
I kind of enjoyed it yesterday. Actually, at one point, I looked up MySpace to see if it existed still. And apparently it's a completely different platform now, and it's used for music. I had no idea.
I
got rid of my account a long
Justin
time.
Timberlake is part of an owner of it. They acquired it. So basically, the story of MySpace is the first significant social media platform, and Fox bought it so they could basically scrape it for all of its user data, and then they sold it for pennies on the dollar to a consortium that Justin Timberlake was part of, to reposition it into, what is it now, music?
I think so. I guess you can activate some original style of MySpace too, like the old style. But I don't know. I don't have an account. I deleted it probably around 2008.
Is Tom on there? Are you able to be friends with Tom?
I have no idea. But I did see a post from Tom yesterday saying something along the lines of, "Serves you guys all right for leaving MySpace." Or something like that. It was funny. There was Friendster too. Friendster was there for a hot second. I don't know if you remember that.
You know who ultimately screwed up the most in this whole social movement? You know who the first was? And and I'll tell you the brilliance of Facebook. Classmates.com.
Oh, I got an alert from them today. Someone looked at my profile.
Remember, before Facebook, there was Classmates.com. And that's how Facebook started, was to connect classmates, right? Classmates.com was the first one and I remember at the time it was like, oh, I want to connect with this person I went to school with and I haven't seen in 5 years or whatever. But they wanted to charge like $40 a month.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody was going to charge $40 a month to look up somebody that you didn't really like that much in high school to begin with.
Not when they can see who's viewed their profile.
So the brilliance of Facebook was to come along and say, no, actually, we're going to build all this and we're just going to do it. We're going to give it away for free. And that is basically was where Classmates.com screwed up. Facebook was smart enough, and Peter Thiel was smart enough to say, no, do it for free, build it, raise a shit ton of money. And then we're going to make our customers, our clients, we're going to make them the product. So we're going to then let them tell us and share everything they can. And we're going to sell them off to advertisers and marketers, which was also brilliant at the time, regardless. But it goes back to that old saying, like, if you're getting something for free, it's because you're the product.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true. I actually enjoyed the time where it was down yesterday. I felt completely disconnected from the world and I loved it. I did check to see if MySpace was still alive, but everything else, I didn't really care.
Yeah.
It was so nice.
I know.
Makes me want to chuck my phone out the window.
I think it's an indication of things to come. I think, the kitchen is certainly getting hot for Facebook, not just from, I think, users, but also the amount of disinformation. I think the congressional oversight that's going to happen, and are going to probably try to find a way to regulate it like a utility. And, I think we're going to see potentially where oversight of these platforms will turn into like what happened with the big tobacco, where you're going to have more and more of these studies coming out that show how suicide rates among females and young girls and kids as a whole are driven up by these social media platforms. And, somebody's going to figure out a way to do something about this stuff. And I think it's, at the end of the day, it's what's going to do is present an opportunity for hopefully something better to come out of this.
Right. I don't know what that would be. I can't even believe where we are today compared to 20 years ago. It's wild.
Well,
that was
it. Is. Well, stay wild, Nicole.
Oh, I will, for sure. So wild.
All right. Well, thanks so much for listening to us this week. Nicole, if somebody wants to get more information about any of the verbal machinations that just took place, what would they go about doing that?
They can email me at nicole@safewire.com.
Great. Thanks so much.
Awesome.